Hey friends and fellow Simmerstorians. Today I am so excited to actually take you guys step by step through my spreadsheets for my Victorian gameplay. And just as a bit of a disclaimer, this is crafted specifically around The Sims 2. For me, that has been the game that is easiest when it comes to this kind of high level of control. However, I absolutely encourage you guys to think about ways in which you can take this format and kind of turn it into your own with The Sims 3, The Sims 4, or also The Sims 2. And I am working on formatting this for The Sims 4 specifically, but it's taking a little while, and that's kind of what my legacy challenge is for right now, kind of just playing with it, seeing what works, what doesn't work. Without further ado, welcome to my spreadsheets. I have a lot of them in one file here. So to start off with, this is my schedule. This is kind of like the master schedule. I've done this where I have 1 week planned out or 2 weeks. It's really up to you guys. I kind of like recycle this week. So the yellow, so here we have the Forester family. This set of spreadsheets is from a different challenge that I've done for The Sims 2. It's done a little bit further than the other ones, so we actually have up to Generation 5 here, so it's a lot bigger, but I lost this neighborhood to corruption, unfortunately. But I thought it'd be great to show you guys a spreadsheet of a neighborhood that's a little bit further ahead. So Forester family here, the yellow blocks represent days that we have already played, so I tend to play in like 5-day increments here, and so you can see where we've left off. We've left off on Friday, and so when I would start over, I would just simply turn these back white and then start here and make them yellow to, account to where we are in the game. Sorry, I know this is a slightly different yellow. I exported this from like numbers on a MacBook, so things are a little bit different, but that's okay. That's not the point. So basically I play everything to the point where everyone is kind of caught up, and so it's a cyclical way of playing. You don't have to do that. I think that's the way that keeps all of your families kind of systematically at the same point in their lives. So this is sort of how I keep track of everyone. And for like my first few families, I'll just do like the last name, but after that we put the head of households. And so each name here is the head of the household, or like the main family of that last name. Yeah, it's worked really well for me. If you want, you can create this a little bit more in depth, where you actually put things that need to happen on certain days, like birthdays and marriages and like going off to college and stuff. And that can be a great way of kind of keeping track of where you are in the schedule, of what needs to happen. And I also have another version of this for universities. We're not there in my current Sims challenge. Unfortunately, I don't tend to let my Sims go to university until they are in the upper middle class, just because it costs money, and that's what happens. And I'll do like 3 weeks for university just because it's a little bit easier to keep track of. And I have my universities spread out by gender because 19th century is great for gender, obviously. So here we have a college, it's primarily for men, and then a finishing school, which is also just a university, which I use for women. And so when I send my Sims off to college, I actually do it when they have hit the 7th day of being a teenager. And so I was struggling a lot with grappling with the fact that in The Sims 2, specifically, certain Sims were gaining time and other Sims were losing time because you only get this extra playable age if you go to college, and so that was kind of throwing things off. So I account it for essentially being 7-day period in the rest of the Sims lives. So when it comes to mortality rates, I mean, most of you guys know that this is probably my favorite part of the game. Also, sorry, you might be hearing some drilling. We are having the balconies completely redone at our apartment complex, and it's very loud, and it's been going on for 3 weeks. I actually have separated these out into 3 different mortality spreadsheets, and I recommend you guys doing this as well, because the different social classes determine your different mortality rates. I use these mortality rates specifically for the lower class, so this encompasses a pretty large portion of your game. And as if you guys also play this will realize, your lower and lower middle social class tends to have the most Sims in it. That's just kind of how things go, and I think that's quite realistic. When it comes to like 1 out of 4, I don't always play with baby as an age group anymore because I would still have to age them up into toddlers to kill them, but that was a way of kind of factoring in infant mortality or like stillbirths quite specifically. So I kept that in on the spreadsheet for you guys if you wanted to see it. Obviously, this in having both baby and toddler as separate age groups increases the likelihood of infant mortality, which I do think is really historically accurate, and I love that about it. I just got frustrated with having to age them up immediately and kill them anyway. So what I've been doing is essentially just Googling a random number generator, and like I think it's just Google's actually. And so I put like the references between 1 and 4, and I always keep 1 as the death number now, and I think that's just worked pretty easily. So for each age group, and I like to do this at the beginning of everyone's lives as soon as they're born, just so that I can plan ahead because I really like that high level of control. However, there is another way that you can play this, and that's actually how I first started using these, is that I would roll each time my sim aged up, and so you kind of lose a little bit of control. However, you gain a little bit of chaos. And so if you would like to play as though you have no idea what's going to happen in a sim's next age, then I totally recommend just doing each of these rolls at birthdays. As you can imagine, I change the way that I play depending on when I know a sim is going to die. So if I know a sim is going to die as a teenager, I like to marry them off a little bit earlier, definitely skipping college. And I mean, it takes away a level of realism there. If we're being honest, I play this way because I like to have control over things. So yeah, I really encourage you to think about the way that you specifically play your games and really tailor it to yourselves. So the way I'm playing now, like for the lower class, toddlers would have 1 out of 6, children 1 out of 9, teenagers 1 out of 14, adults 1 out of 19, and then I scale it back for elders and 1 out of 9. But as you can see, I do change the statistics, the mortality rates based on social class. So I think we actually just add 1. So toddler would be at 1 out of 7, children 1 out of 10 instead of 1 out of 9, teenagers 1 out of 15, adults 1 out of 20, and elders 1 out of 10. So the idea here is that your Sims will have more access to a healthy lifestyle, to unadulterated food, which was a really huge issue in the 19th century, like lacing food with copper and things to make it look better because of food shortages and stuff. By the time we get up to the upper class, we have like toddlers 1 out of 8, children 1 out of 11, teenagers 1 out of 16. A couple different things can affect your mortality rates. And those are things that you can choose to use. You can change yourself. So for Sims giving birth, I tend to roll 1 out of 15, and that accounts for maternal death rates. I think I should maybe change it because, yeah, I think I'm going to recommend 1 out of 10 to you guys because I think I've only ever had like 1 Sim die from maternal death rate, and that's not very realistic in this era. So as you play, you'll realize you need to tweak things based on the way that you're playing, and that's great. And like, kind of the point if they catch the flu, because the flu happens a lot in The Sims 2, which is something I really enjoy, and it's actually contagious. You can do 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 15, whatever works for you. And so this is kind of how I account for infectivity rates in the 19th century, because we don't really have germ theory until the later half of the 19th century. And because there is a gap between theory and practice when it comes to medicine and scientific theories, so even though we have germ theory discovered by, I think, 1864-ish, your everyday people are not going to have access to this information. They're not going to know how to utilize this information, and most clinicians won't be trained in germ theory at this point. There's not really as much of conversation about contagion as I think we tend to think about now, especially in the age of COVID. So I don't really usually play up the infectivity aspect or the contagion aspect of this game. And if that's something you want to change, then play it up more. The flu in The Sims 2 is contagious, and so every time someone gets sick, gets the flu, gets a cold, I do a roll like this. And so that's how I account for it. Another fun way of kind of customizing this is also to take into consideration the age at which a Sim's parent died. So, say your Sim's parent died as a late teenager or as an adult. If you want, you can kind of increase the risk of that happening to the Sim based on heredity. You can actually have that mortality rate to make it higher for the current child that you're rolling for. So if you want them to have an increased risk of dying as a teenager, then instead of 1 out of 16, you can roll for 1 out of 8. As you can see, there's a lot of different ways that you can customize your game. And I think the best way of finding those points is really just to play and see what works for you and what doesn't work for you. If the mortality rates are my favorite, the arranged marriages are a close contender. And so I have all of my arranged marriages divided up by social class. So we have lower middle, upper, and royal aristocracy. And I also have an outcast class here. I don't always play with that, but in this game I did. So basically the outcast community is more tied to a specific community, like a parish, where people who would be outside of what would be considered normal in this period would live. So this is really designed for people who either aren't interested in elevating in social class and really just want to kind of live off the land, or people who have been publicly shamed, or people who are like vampires or, your kind of occult Sims. Everything else is really tied to money. So our lower class goes up to, I've recently increased it. I used to go up to 20,000. I now do 25,000. So your lower class Sims would have anywhere between 0 and 25,000 funds. We're going to come back to inheritance in a minute, but essentially the expected inheritance for all of your social classes are half of the lowest amount, except for this. For the lower class, it's half of the highest amount. But as you can see, lower middle is 30,000 to 50,000, and it would be half of 30,000. Then we'll just go through the rest of them. Upper middle is 50 to 80, and we've got 25,000 for expected inheritance. Upper class is 80,000 to 120,000. Expected inheritance jumps up a lot. It's 40,000. And the design for the inheritances is so that the children, in theory, would marry someone of the same social class. So 40 plus 40,000 would be 80,000. So the idea and design of that is that the children would be able to maintain their social class. And that's a really important aspect of participating in your social class. And then the royal aristocracy is something that I have recently incorporated into my gameplay, and that's just because it takes kind of a long time to get there. It's 200,000 plus funds. You have at least 60,000 in inheritance, and ideally that has less to do with money and more to do with giving them a royal title. So we'll hop over here really quick, and basically you would give them one of these titles. I have them titled in order of prestige. So coming back to the arranged marriages, under inheritance, you'll either have a numerical amount, their financial amount they will be receiving, and that means that they are a spare, or you will have heir written, and that means that they are inheriting the entire family estate. So the firstborn of the family, with the way I play, because it's a patriarchal society, would inherit their estate, so I would write them as heir. So when children are born, if they're male and they're going to live at least until their teenage years, I automatically add them to the arranged marriages spreadsheet, and I will put them on the left side right under the social class, and then I add their intended arranged marriage to the right. And then I have, there's a couple different ways that you can indicate that the marriage has happened. More recently, I've done away with the literal check marks and have just taken them and boldened their name, and if it's bold, then you know that they're already married. But again, that's personal preference. And so as I mentioned, I don't put any of the women's names on the arranged marriages spreadsheet because I have a separate one for them. This is the ladies in waiting spreadsheet. And as you can imagine, I only intend to put women on this spreadsheet. I also put their generation. That's something I've done more recently. Instead of the checkmark section, I'll have like gen for generation, and you'll write what generation they are because you always want to marry within the same generation. I know that's not really historically accurate because we have a lot of people who intermarried based on generations in the 19th century. But for me, I just like to have a clear cut idea of who is in what generation, and that is personal preference. I just think it's easier to keep track of things. Here you can see that I have utilized the bolding mechanism for women who have been married off, but the most important part here is that you know what generation they are, you know what social class they are, and you know what their dowry is going to be. So you can see we've got like lower middle. Here we have someone with 20,600. Dowries don't just have to be pure money. So something that is really, really enticing in my Sims 2 game is the Bookshelf of Learning, which is the career reward for education. And so that doesn't really count towards your social class minimum. However, it does absolutely increase desirability. Yeah, and so it obviously takes a while for you to be able to actually meet the minimum inheritance quota. So we've got a couple here who have met like 40 and 30, but the idea is that it's not necessarily easy to make. We also have cemetery registers, and this is really important for my gameplay in The Sims 2 because the ghosts drive me absolutely insane. Just I can't have them on the home lot. I think it's a little bit different if you're considering The Sims 4. This would be great to include for The Sims 3 as well because cemeteries are kind of a natural process of the game. But I don't know if I would want to waste an entire lot for graves in The Sims 4 because we have so few lots, you know? So I like to just kind of keep track of who is where so that I can keep families and spouses together. So endowments come back to the college and university gameplay. So I only send Sims to college if they can build up $15,000 worth of tuition to take with them. That tuition essentially just kind of disappears from the game, so I'll just like cheat the money away essentially. But what I like to do is kind of put a common pool. So I will have a building idea and then I will list out all of the Sims whose tuition is going towards that building. And so each of these Sims represent 15,000, and so I can, build a library, and then because it's an endowment, I'll usually choose like the family who seems to have contributed the most and name it after them. And that's how you build up your university buildings and community organically. So I've really enjoyed playing that way, and it's actually inspired me to use it in the actual neighborhood as well. So I keep track of, this was a new mechanism when I first started using the spreadsheet, which is why there's not a whole lot. But I use a spreadsheet to keep track of all of the bills that have been paid by a particular family. I will just like keep adding to it. So if the McCarthy's next bill is 500, I'll add that to this 1,000 and it'll just be 1,500. And then I'll have the town total at the very end over here. And that's how much money we have to spend on like public service things like parks, gardens, and even like parishes and cemeteries. So something I figured you guys would probably be pretty interested is the domestic service log here. So I have 3 different spreadsheets. Basically, here on the right are the types of positions that I use, the skills needed to achieve these roles. And if a skill is listed, you need to get to at least level 5 of each skill. But you could also change that depending on the role. So like for a butler, you could say that they need level 10 of each skill. And yeah, so as you can see, the lower paying ones have less skills that you need, and some are just like, the gardener badge. So some are badges and whatnot. And I have tried to cater this specifically to how much people in domestic service would make, because it's kind of a hierarchy, you know? So like the butler and the housekeeper are in charge of like the footmen and the maids and everything. So the people at the top of the hierarchy would be making much more money, and obviously the more physical roles make, like labor roles, make a lot less money. You can change it up if you want. This is based on the research that I've done. So to kind of keep track of who deserves what money, I have a service log here. So there's only one person here right now, but you would eventually end up adding a bunch of different names for people who work in domestic service. And it's kind of like keeping a resume, you know? So you can see who they've worked for, you can see what their skills are qualified for, and how much you owe them. So if their daily pay is 400, I would kind of keep adding to that total, because like normally I wouldn't give them the money weekly. It would just kind of like build up. Or actually, now that I have the banks, I would probably just add it each week to the banks. But if you just kind of want to do it on an owing system, like once they leave the service, you just give them the amount of money that's in total owed. So there are two different ways to play it. I mean, I tend to have them live on the lot, which is sometimes why I do this. The service log here can keep track of people who are currently working. So I have one for families hiring. So I'll put the head of household, the position they're hiring for, and sometimes it's a couple. And so you could replicate this into another little spreadsheet over here that is like Sims looking for work. But sometimes I just kind of put that in the service log. But once your game gets really large and it gets a little bit out of control, I think having a separate one would be helpful. So here I have tried to list out career viability by social class, and I would like to say that this is not complete because I created this specifically when I was working on my Mac and I didn't have all of the different DLC or expansion pack careers. So there are things to add. I have tried to divide it up quite specifically based on how much money you can make from a career. So lower class careers, you're not really supposed to have any of the proper careers in the game. Basically, you can be a farmer or like any other kind of trade based artisan, like a butcher or a vintner and stuff like that. But you can only run home lot stores, or I am working on a collection of careers specifically for the lower class that don't make you a lot of money. And so those are options as well. For the lower middle class, I tried to stick with the career options that would at most, so these numbers at the end of each career represent the highest amount of money you make at level 10. So for those, I stuck with the 1000s, but you can run off lot businesses here. Upper middle tends to be 2 to 3,000. So we've got like, we start to have the ones with kind of large bonuses, and I've put those in parentheses. Upper is, there's only 4 here. I think there's going to be more with the other DLCs and expansions, but like we have the artist, natural scientist, which makes a lot of money, and like show business and paranormal. But I do have also in parentheses here the amount of days of work, I think, for the 10th level of the career. For the aristocracy, there is a royalty mod for The Sims 2. It's not like the royalty mod for The Sims 4. I'm not meaning that. It just specifically gives you a career for royalty, and it gives you quite a lot of money. So for the aristocracy, I would probably put them in that. So technically, they have the ability to do whatever career they want if you're, passionate about having them complete their lifetime once. To be honest, Sims in the Victorian Sims 2 rarely complete their lifetime once. That's just kind of how it goes, unless they're the upper class and they can kind of dabble around in a career that's for fun. But careers at this point aren't necessarily fashionable. It's not going to be a proper scandal if they're working in politics, in the aristocracy, or in law enforcement. I have an entire spreadsheet that kind of lists out the elevation eligibility to another social status. And this is something I have more recently incorporated into my game. So I'll put like the head of household over here. I can actually write that. Head of household, and their current status, the next qualifying level. So if they're lower middle, the next qualifying level is upper middle, so they would need to reach a household net worth of 50,000. But there are also three other criteria that allow you to move up to the next social class. You don't have to use these if you want, but I have found them to be really helpful. So I phrase them as questions. So the first one is, do all children in the current generation have inheritances and dowries that meet the class minimum? So you would either put yes or no. Does the house net worth meet the next qualifying level? If it meets 50,000 for this instance, then yeah. And are there any scandals from the current generation? So this means the generation that is in the head of household or their children. And so this can be the one that can really throw things off. And a scandal is something that you as the simmer create. This isn't an inherent quality in the game. So this is anything like someone being a criminal, someone marrying significantly below their social class. So actually, really anyone marrying below their social class beyond like, here I'll pull up the arranged marriages. So while it's not going to be a scandal for an upper class sim to marry an upper middle class sim, it probably would be a scandal for them to marry lower class or lower middle. So any gap beyond one here is going to be a concern, if that makes sense. So, like, upper middle is fine to marry lower middle, but not lower class. And same with royal aristocracy. Upper middle is probably not great. Upper class is fine. I will kind of keep track of these, and your social class doesn't really change mid generation. That social class change will only be represented once you have the next generation born. Here actually we have a good example. So the Prosser family, as a repeater, they are pretty staunchly in the upper middle class, but say they got enough money in his lifetime to qualify for the upper class. Now, Ezra never himself gets to move into the upper class. However, his children do. So we have some Prossers over here in the upper class. So Godric Prosser, his son, would be the one who benefits from Ezra making enough money to qualify to the upper class. Yeah, I think that's all my spreadsheets. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any suggestions. As you can see, this has grown with me as I have grown as a historian, as I have grown as a simmer, and the same thing is going to happen to you guys. And so I'm really excited to see all of you develop your own spreadsheet mechanisms. I will put kind of like a blank Google Doc spreadsheet for you guys if you want to kind of like pilfer mine, but I really recommend tailoring it to how you play individually because that's the way it's going to work the most for you. So let me know what you think. As I said, I am working on transitioning a version of this into The Sims 4, so I would really love to hear from you guys what you think from my Sim 2 spreadsheets would function really well in The Sims 4. So thank you guys for watching. I'm so glad we could finally get this video out. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks.